The World Health Organization calls the climate crisis a, quote, health crisis, and warns that climate change could fuel the spread of infectious diseases. Can you point to specific measures in your climate plan that address that threat?
Well, of course we do. I mean, look, this is what the scientists are telling us, the same scientists who make your point there, Jake. What they're telling us is if we don't get our act together in the next 7 or 8 years, there will be irreversible damage done to this planet. We're talking about cities in America, from Miami to New Orleans to Charleston, South Carolina, being underwater. We are talking about severe droughts, which will prevent farmers in the Midwest from growing the food that we need. We're talking about extreme weather disturbances, which hit Houston, Texas, Venice, Italy, just a few months ago. We are talking about the absolute need, and I want to hear Joe's position on this. This is not a middle-of-the-ground thing. This is not building a few more solar panels or a few more wind turbines. What this is about is transforming our energy system as quickly as we humanly can away from fossil fuel. It is insane that we continue to have fracking in America. It is absurd that we give tens of billions of dollars a year in tax breaks and subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. This has got to end, and end now, if we love our kids and future generations.
Vice President Biden?
First thing that President Obama and I were summoned to the the Defense Department for was to meet with all the chiefs. The single greatest threat to our national security, they said, is climate change. Single greatest threat to our national security. Because as populations have to move, because they can no longer live where they are, because their islands are sinking, because you saw what happened in Darfur with the change in weather patterns and the desert there, it causes war. It causes great migrations, great migrations. They said that's the single biggest problem. Number two, there's an awful lot of people today who are in fact getting ill because of the changes in the environment, particularly up where Bernie lives. It has nothing to do with him, but up in the Northeast, because you have everything from beetle infestation and a whole range of things that are causing diseases as well, in addition to eliminating foliage.
So, Vice President Biden, let me ask you then. You talk about this being the number one crisis.
Yes.
They told you at the Pentagon. The price tag for your climate plan is about $1.7 trillion. That's about $14 trillion less than Senator Sanders wants to spend on this. Is your plan ambitious enough to tackle this crisis?
Yes, it is ambitious enough to tackle the crisis, because what you go to joebiden.com, I lay out the first 13 things I would do immediately upon being elected. Number one, we're going to once again reinstate all the cuts the president made and everything from the CAFE standards, how far automobiles can go, investing in light rail so that we take cars off the road, making sure we're in a position where we are now in a position that we put 500,000 charging stations in areas that, in fact, all new highways that we built, making sure that we spend $500 billion a year in the federal government paying for transportation, the vehicles we run, all of those being converted to be able to run on low carbon fuel and or be able to run on no carbon fuel at all by having them move into a direction that is all carbon free. We can do these things. We can lay down the tracks where nothing can be changed by the next president or following president, the one beyond that. In addition to that, we also have to, I would immediately rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, which I helped put together. I would call the 100 nations, over 100 nations, but the 100 major polluters to the United States in the first 100 days to up the ante and make it clear that, in fact, if they didn't, there'd be a price to pay. And lastly, I would be right now organizing the hemisphere and the world to provide $20 billion for the Amazon, for Brazil, no longer to burn the Amazon so they could have forest. They're no longer forest, but they could have farming, and say, this is what we're going to do. They absorb more carbon in the Amazon and the region that's burning now than we emit in one entire year per year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senator Sanders?
All well and good, but nowhere near enough. I mean, you mentioned we started this debate talking about a warlike situation in terms of the coronavirus. And we said we have to act accordingly. You said it. I think you're right. I said it. We have to act dramatically, boldly, if we're going to save lives in this country and around the world. I look at climate change in exactly the same way. It's not a question of re-entering the Paris Accord. That's fine. Who cares? Not a big deal. The deal right now is, do we have the courage? And this gets back to the point I'm trying to make all night long. Do we take on the healthcare industry and tell them their profits are not more important than healthcare for all? Do we take on the fossil fuel industry? Look, in terms of the fossil fuel industry, these guys have been lying. They've been lying for years, like the tobacco industry lied 50 years ago. Oh, we don't know if fossil fuels, if oil and carbon emissions are causing climate change. They knew. ExxonMobil knew. They lied. In fact, I think they should be held criminally accountable. But this, Jake, is an issue of enormous consequence. What Joe is saying goes nowhere near enough. It's not a question of money. Give me a minute here. We have time to talk about this. This is a world-shaking event.
I understand. I just want to give him a chance to respond, and then we can come back
let's
to you.
stay on.
We're staying on this issue.
Number one, no more subsidies for fossil fuel industry. No more drilling on federal lands. No more drilling, including offshore. No ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. Ends, number one. Number two, we're in a situation as well where we cannot, we are able to move rapidly to change the dynamic in terms of what we can do to set in motion. The fact that he says climate change, Paris Accord doesn't mean much. We could get everything exactly right. We're 15% of the problem. 85% of the problem is over there. We need someone who can deal internationally. We need someone who can bring the world together again. We need someone who can move in a direction that, in fact, if you violate the commitment you make, you will pay an economic price for it, like what's happening in China. They're exporting coal, significant coal.
Thank you.
Look, obviously, the Paris Accord is useful, but it doesn't go anywhere. If you laugh at Joe, then you're missing the point. This is an existential crisis.
Bingo.
You talk about, I'm talking about stopping fracking as soon as we possibly can. I'm talking about telling the fossil fuel industry that they are going to stop destroying this planet. No ifs, buts, and maybes about it. I'm talking about speaking to China. Well, I'm not sure your proposal does that. I'm talking about speaking to China, to Russia, to countries all over the world. And in this moment, making the point that instead of spending $1.8 trillion on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, maybe we should pool our resources and fight our common enemy, which is climate change. I know your heart is in the right place, but this requires dramatic, bold action. We've got to take on the fossil fuel industry. Your plan does not do that.
My plan takes on the fossil fuel industry and it unites the world. He just got finished saying, what's he going to do? He's going to bring these countries together, make it clear to them. I'm saying we bring them together, make them live up to the commitments. If they don't live up to the commitments, they pay a financial price for it. They pay an economic price for it because we can do everything. My state is 3 feet above sea level. I don't need a lecture on what's going to happen about rising seas. I know what happens. I watched the whole Delmarva Peninsula, just like it is in South Carolina and the rest. Something I know a little bit about. I wrote the first climate change bill that was in the Congress, which PolitiFact said was a game changer. I'm the guy who came along and said with Dick Lugar that we're going to trade, we'll forgive your debt if you don't cut down your forest. I've been way ahead of this curve. This idea that all of a sudden Bernie found this out is amazing to me.
Senator Sanders?
Now, Bernie didn't find it out. Bernie is listening to the scientists. And what, you're talking about making countries around the world fulfill their commitments. Those commitments are not enough. What this moment is about, Joe, is that the scientists are telling us they underestimated the severity of the crisis. They were wrong. The problem is more severe. So all that I'm saying right here is that we are fighting for the future of this planet, for the well-being of our kids and future generations. You cannot continue, as I understand Joe believes, to continue fracking. Correct me if I'm wrong. What we need to do right now is bring the world together, tell the fossil fuel industry that we are going to move aggressively to wind, solar, sustainable energies, and energy efficiency.
Thank you, Senator.
No new fracking. And by the way, on the Recovery Act, I was able to make sure we invested $90 billion in making sure we brought down the price of solar and wind that is lower than the price of coal. That's why not another new coal plant will be built. I did that while you were watching. number one. Number two, we're in a situation where we, in fact, have the ability to lay down the tracks where no one can change the dynamic. And that's why we should be talking about things like I've been talking about for years. High-speed rail, taking millions of automobiles off the road, making sure that we move in a direction where no more drilling on federal lands, making sure that we invest in changing the entire fleet of the United States military.